I found my son and my granddaughter living under a bridge. I was speechless when I remembered that my daughter-in-law had said they had gone to live in Australia and would never return after the fight 3 years ago. I took them home. But when my son revealed the secret about his wife, I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. I arrived in Santa Fe, New Mexico on a mild, sunny afternoon. The hotel room I rented was small, but it had a tiny balcony overlooking a street full of people coming and going. I dragged my suitcase into a corner and stood still for a moment, looking out. I could hear street music in the distance, mixing with the laughter and conversations of tourists. I told myself this trip was for healing, to forget the heavy days back in Phoenix, Arizona, where my house now held only silence and painful memories. I grabbed my purse and left the hotel, walking to a small plaza with a murmuring fountain and cool stone benches. I sat down, quietly watching a mime perform for the crowd. I looked around, searching for a little joy in the unfamiliar faces, but my eyes unintentionally stopped at a corner behind the fountain. There, a little girl was huddled, tightly clutching an old, broken rag doll that only had one eye left. She was thin, with dusty, bare feet, and her hair was tangled and matted with sweat. She wasn't begging for money like the other kids. She just sat there silently, with big, sad eyes, watching people pass. I don't know why, but that image squeezed my heart. There was something in her posture, in the way she held her doll, that felt painfully familiar. A couple passed nearby, and the woman accidentally dropped a piece of cookie. The girl looked at this piece, her eyes bright but full of hesitation. She hesitated for a long time, as if afraid someone would see her, and then she slowly crawled, picked up the cookie, carefully dusted it off, and put it in the torn pocket of her jacket. That gesture was like a needle plunging into my chest. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw the ice cream I was eating into the nearest trash can. I got up and walked quickly to a bakery a few feet away. I bought 2 freshly baked croissants, still warm and fragrant, and a small carton of chocolate milk. I returned to the plaza and approached the girl. I crouched down, trying to soften my voice. "Here, sweetie." She startled and lifted her head to look at me. Her eyes were big, black, and full of distrust, like those of a frightened small animal. I smiled and pushed the bag of pastries toward her, but when her gaze met mine, time seemed to stop. On her right eyelid was a tiny mole, so minuscule you had to look closely to notice it. That mole was identical to Michael's, my son. I felt the air catch in my throat, as if someone was squeezing my chest. My granddaughter was in Australia, living a comfortable life with her parents. That's what I kept telling myself, but my hands were shaking as I offered her the bag again. The girl hesitated for a moment, and then extended her thin, small hand to take it. Her small, cold fingers touched mine, and then she whispered something that made my whole world collapse. "Grandma, is that really you?" Her voice was faint, trembling, but so clear I couldn't pretend I misheard. I pulled my hand away abruptly, as if I had been burned. My heart was pounding, my mind was spinning. I stood up immediately, stepped back, and forced an awkward smile. "You're mistaken, sweetie. My granddaughter is in Australia with her parents." I didn't dare look into the girl's eyes anymore. That look, sad but full of hope, seemed to plead with me not to leave. I turned around and walked quickly, trying to escape the strange feeling that was oppressing my chest. I kept telling myself it couldn't be my granddaughter. How could it be? But the girl's faint voice still pursued me, echoing behind my back. "Grandma, don't go. Grandma." I heard her small, hurried footsteps, the sound of her sandals slapping the ground. She was running after me, her voice broken by crying. I stopped in the middle of a narrow alley, my heart in a knot. The thin, large-eyed girl was still clinging to the edge of my blouse, as if afraid I would disappear if she let go. In my hand, the crumpled tourist map no longer made any sense. The colorful streets, the melodies of the musicians, everything blurred in the face of that pleading gaze. Tears rolled down her dirty face, but she didn't cry loudly. She just sobbed softly, her voice trembling. "You really don't recognize me, Grandma? It's me." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if someone were gripping my heart. Finally, I sighed and sat down on the stoop of a long-closed store. The cold stone beneath my feet no longer mattered. I looked at the girl, trying to keep my voice gentle. "It's okay, sweetie. Tell me, why are you here alone? Where are your parents?" The girl shook her head, her small hand clinging to mine, afraid I would get up and leave. Tears welled up again, sliding down her cheeks, but she tried to hold them back as she said in a weak voice, "If you don't believe me, I'll take you to see my dad. When you see him, you'll believe me." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to run away, go back to the hotel, close the door, and pretend this encounter never happened. But the look in that girl's eyes, a mix of hope and fear, was like an invisible rope holding me back. I nodded, letting her take my hand and lead me. Her hand was freezing, so thin I could feel every small bone. She led me away from the tourist streets full of laughter and lights. We turned onto a narrow dirt path, hidden next to a river that flowed lazily through the city. A smell of dampness and trash made me frown, but the girl didn't seem to notice. She walked faster, as if afraid I would change my mind. The path led us along a trail where the sunlight disappeared under the shadow of an old concrete bridge. Under the bridge, the air was heavy, damp, and cold. I saw some cardboard boxes spread out on the dirty ground, a ragged blanket, empty plastic bottles, and a small fire pit that had been out for a long time. It was no place to live, especially not for a child. My heart sank, but before I could say anything, the girl let go of my hand and ran forward. "Dad, look who I brought!" Her voice sounded clear, with a nervous tone. A man, his back to us, was rummaging through a pile of scrap metal. He was wearing a torn jacket, and his thin hands were picking out cans and bottles to put in a large sack. Hearing her, he grunted in a hoarse voice, "Natalie, I've told you 1,000 times not to bother people." He didn't turn around right away. He just slowly straightened up, wiped his hands on his worn denim pants, and finally turned around. In that moment, I felt time stop. Although his hair was messy and an unkempt beard covered almost his entire face, even though his body was so thin he looked like only skin and bones, I recognized him immediately. It was Michael, my only son. The purse I was carrying fell to the ground with a dull thud. I stood motionless, unable to utter a word. My mouth went dry, my head was spinning. It couldn't be my Michael, my strong son, full of energy, the one who used to laugh out loud in my kitchen when I made him his favorite turkey with mashed potatoes. But those eyes, tired and red, were still my son's. Michael saw me, and I clearly saw his face change color. First it was surprise, as if he couldn't believe I was really there. Then fear, and finally deep shame. He quickly pushed Natalie behind him, protecting her instinctively. He lowered his head and murmured, almost in a whisper, "I'm sorry. We have nothing to give you. Please leave." I knew instantly that he was pretending not to recognize me. He didn't want me to see him like this, ragged, dirty, living under a bridge like a homeless person. But I couldn't let him push me away again. I took a step forward, regardless of the damp earth under my feet. My legs were shaking, but I couldn't stop. I raised my hand, wanting to touch his face, to make sure it wasn't a dream, but my hand remained suspended in the air, not daring to touch him. My voice broke, full of pain. "Michael, what? What happened to you, son?" I couldn't hold back the tears. For 3 years I had lived with the pain of having lost him, and now he was in front of me, but in this state. I didn't understand. I couldn't comprehend how everything had gotten so terrible. Hearing his name, Michael seemed to collapse. The wall he had tried to put up completely crumbled. He lifted his head, his red eyes filled with tears. He knelt on the ground, held his head in his hands, and with a voice choked with sobs, said, "Mom, I'm sorry. It's all my fault." His crying, though he tried to hold it back, echoed under the silent bridge. Natalie, frightened, looked at him and then at me. She ran to him, hugged his shoulder, and said in a trembling voice, "Dad, don't cry. Don't cry, please. Grandma is here. She's going to help us, right, Grandma?" Minutes later, I was sitting on a cold stone under the bridge, watching Michael use the torn sleeve of his shirt to wipe Natalie's dirty face. His hands were shaking, but they were careful, as if he was afraid of hurting her. That image broke my heart. My Michael, the tall, strong boy, always smiling like a ray of sunshine, was now just a shadow of the man he was, thin exhausted, covered in dust. His torn, dirty clothes, matted hair, and thick beard made him look unrecognizable. Only his eyes were the same, tired but full of the kindness of the son I raised for 30 years. Natalie huddled against her father, clutching her broken doll, her big eyes looking at me as if asking for help. I wanted to hug them both, to protect them from that damp, cold place, but the memory of that fateful day 3 years ago came rushing back to me like an avalanche, clear, painful, impossible to stop. It was a Saturday afternoon, the sky clear and the sun mild. I was in my small kitchen in Phoenix, stirring the turkey and mashed potatoes simmering in the pot, Michael's favorite meal since he was a child. I was smiling, thinking about dinner that night, when the whole family would be gathered again, laughing and talking like old times. Natalie, who was only 3 years old then, would surely be happy to see her small bowl filled with gravy. I had also prepared a platter of stuffing and cranberry sauce, just the way Michael liked it. But then, the front door slammed open so hard it startled me, and I almost dropped the wooden spoon in my hand. I heard heavy, hurried footsteps, and then Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway, followed by Adrian, my daughter-in-law. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying, but I immediately recognized the way she clung to Michael, like an actress playing a victim. Michael threw the car keys onto the dining table, making a sharp noise that made me stop. His face was tense, and his eyes were burning with rage, a look I had never seen on my son before. "Mom, come on, we need to talk," he said in an icy voice. I wiped my hands on my apron and went into the living room, my heart already uneasy. "What's wrong, Michael? Why are you so upset?" I tried to keep my voice calm, even though something inside me sensed the worst. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his fists clenched, until he suddenly pointed his finger at me. "Stop pretending, Mom. Why are you talking bad about Adrienne to the neighbor? You said she's lazy, that she doesn't know how to take care of her daughter, and that she only spends my money, didn't you?" His voice trembled with fury, but what hurt me the most was his gaze, full of disappointment and distance. I froze, as if someone had slapped me hard. Who told you that?" I stammered, trying to remember if I had said anything to Mrs. Peterson, my neighbor. Yes, I had complained sometimes, it's true, but only as a mother worried about her son. I never said Adrienne was lazy, much less that she only knew how to spend money. Before I could explain, Adrienne spoke between sobs, clinging to Michael like a child seeking protection. "I told you, honey, don't make this a bigger deal. It's just that I can't take it anymore. This morning, your mom wouldn't let me take Natalie to the park. She said it was a pointless waste of gasoline." She wiped her tears, but I clearly saw the calculation behind her look. I tried to stay calm, my voice trembling. "I just said weekend traffic is heavy, Adrienne. I didn't mean to forbid you anything." But Michael interrupted me abruptly, as if I were a liar. "Enough, Mom. Adrienne already told me everything. You say her family is poor, that you always criticize her, you control my money, and you even said giving my wife money is idiotic." Every word was a stab in the chest. I didn't understand how everything had gone so far. I only wanted the best for my son, for him and Adrienne to live in peace, for Natalie to grow up in a happy home. But my words no longer carried weight. Michael wasn't listening. He only believed his wife's tears. I approached, wanting to take his hand, wanting to tell him I never meant to hurt him. But he stepped back with a cold look, as if I were a stranger and not his mother. "From today on, I don't want you interfering in my life anymore," he said through clenched teeth, each word like a hammer hitting my soul. "Even if I starve on the street, I won't come back to you." That sentence froze my heart. I stood motionless in the middle of the living room, while the aroma of the turkey and mashed potatoes in the kitchen became bland, empty, meaningless. Michael turned around and took Adrienne's hand, going straight upstairs to the bedroom. I heard the closet opening, the sound of things being hastily thrown into a suitcase. I ran upstairs and stood in the doorway, only to witness a heartbreaking scene. Michael and Adrienne were packing clothes and belongings, as if they couldn't bear to stay a second longer in that house. Natalie was huddled on the bed, hugging her small doll, crying uncontrollably out of fear. "Dad, where are we going? I don't want to leave," she sobbed. but Adrian only handed more clothes to Michael coldly, without even looking at me. Michael didn't say anything either. He just packed in silence, avoiding my gaze. Minutes later, they came downstairs together, opened the front door, and walked out. The slam of the door echoed like a final punctuation mark. I didn't even have time to hug my granddaughter one last time. Natalie turned around. Her big eyes looked at me, but Adrienne's hand pulled her, and she disappeared into the darkness. The following weeks, I lived like a ghost. The house, once full of laughter, became a huge, suffocatingly silent place. I called Michael, but he didn't answer. I sent him messages, with no reply. I went to his friends' houses, to places where I thought he might be, but no one knew anything. Every day I sank further into pain and guilt. I wondered what I had done wrong, what word or gesture had driven him away so much. There were nights when I sat in the kitchen, looking at the now cold turkey and mashed potatoes, which I kept cooking out of habit, hoping that one day Michael would return. Until one night, the phone vibrated. A message from Adrienne's number appeared on the screen. My hands were shaking as I opened it, hoping for an explanation, a chance to start over, but the content was like a final stab. "Don't contact us anymore. We're arranging to leave for Australia. Michael says he doesn't want a mother like you. Forget about us." I read and reread it. Every word was a deep cut. I fell to the floor, tears falling uncontrollably. I truly believed I had lost my son forever. The damp smell of the nearby river hit me, mixed with the heavy, dark air that brought me back to reality. Natalie clung to me, her small hand gripping the edge of my jacket tightly, as if afraid I would disappear. Michael was in front of me, his thin shoulders trembling under an old, torn jacket. I looked into his eyes, those eyes that once shone with life and hope, now only showed exhaustion and regret. I couldn't bear to see him like this. I took a bottle of water and a croissant I had bought for Natalie out of my purse. "Eat, son," I said in a soft but firm voice. "Natalie needs you to be strong, too." Michael took the pastry, his hand trembling, his calloused fingers covered in dust. He broke off a small piece and chewed it with difficulty, as if even eating was a burden. Natalie looked at him worriedly and then whispered to me, "Grandma, Dad doesn't like bread. He always says he prefers to save it for me." The girl's innocent words pierced my heart. I squeezed her hand, holding back tears. "I know, my love, but now Dad needs to eat to have the strength to take you home with me, okay?" I looked Michael directly in the eyes. My voice was trembling, heavy with pain. "Adrienne, she told me you were going to Australia. She said you wanted nothing to do with me. Why? Why did you end up like this, Michael?" I needed the truth. I needed to understand what had turned my son, once so proud, into a shadow living under a bridge. Michael lowered his head, squeezing the piece of bread as if trying to gather courage. He swallowed. His hoarse voice began to tell the story, and every one of his words was another stab in my heart. "She was right, Mom," Michael began, his gaze fixed on the ground. "The plan was to go to Australia. Adrienne said she had an acquaintance there, an old friend who worked in construction. She said they would arrange a good job for us, a new life. I believed her. I thought it was an opportunity for Natalie to have a better future." He stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath, as if trying to contain the pain. To speed up the process, she asked me to sign a bunch of papers. She said it was an authorization so she could represent the family at the embassy and prove financial solvency. I didn't read them carefully, Mom. I trusted her completely. A wave of anger washed over me, but not toward Michael, but toward myself. I had seen the signs for a long time. The way Adrienne was always sweet in front of me, but cold when I wasn't around. How she tried to come between my son and me, but I did nothing, thinking they were small marital issues. I shook my head, my voice trembling. "And then what happened, son? What did she do?" Michael continued, his voice getting lower and lower, as if every word was a painful confession. "I took out all my savings, Mom. I sold the car, the one we bought together after so many years of hard work. I gave everything to her. She said she needed the money for the documents, the plane tickets, and the initial expenses in Australia. I didn't doubt anything. I thought she was doing it all for our family. He let out a bitter laugh. But a week before the flight, I received a court summons. Adrienne had filed for divorce. The lawsuit claimed I was abusive to her and Natalie. I froze. I felt the blood turn to ice in my veins. Abuse? You? I almost screamed, unable to believe what I was hearing. Michael, my son, the one who was always so tender with Natalie, who never raised his voice to anyone, accused of abuse. I squeezed Natalie's hand hard, as if to protect her from those lies. "How dare she?" I whispered, my voice broken by rage. Michael shook his head, his eyes red. "I didn't have money to pay a lawyer, Mom. All the assets were in her name because of that authorization paper. I had nothing left. The judge ruled in her favor. I still foolishly believed it was just a formality so we could go to Australia, because that's what she said. I thought she was doing it for some reason, that she would explain it later." He stopped, covering his head with his hands, trying to push away the memories. Natalie snuggled into my arms and whispered, "Dad didn't hit Mom, Grandma. Dad never hit her." I hugged her tightly, and tears started to fall. "I know, Natalie. I know your dad is a good man." I looked at Michael, my voice firm. "Keep going, son. I want to know everything." Michael took a deep breath, trying to calm down. On the day of the flight, she was still smiling. She took us to the airport and told Natalie and me to wait in the chairs while she checked in and checked the luggage. She had all the cash, all 3 of our passports, and the plane tickets. I sat there holding Natalie, waiting. 1 hour, 2 hours. They called the flight for the last time. I called her, but her phone was already turned off. I ran to the counter, almost out of my mind. They told me her name was on the passenger list and that the plane had already taken off. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The image of Michael and Natalie sitting at the airport, confused and waiting, while Adrienne had left with everything, made me want to scream. "She abandoned both of you?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Michael nodded, his voice trembling. "The next day, when we were in the terminal not knowing where to go, she called me from an unknown number." He paused, taking a deep breath, as if he needed to gather strength to continue. "She laughed on the phone, Mom, a cold laugh, as if she was enjoying my pain. She told me, 'See, you were an idiot for trusting me and doubting your own mother. This is the price of your stupidity. Don't ever look for me again.'" Saying this, Michael couldn't hold back. He slumped onto my shoulder and burst into tears like a child. His muffled cry, full of pain, tore through the silence under the bridge. Natalie was also crying, hugging her father with a trembling voice. "Dad, don't cry. Mom wasn't good, but now we have Grandma." I hugged them both tightly, tears streaming down my face. The rage toward Adrienne consumed me like a fire that wanted to burn everything down. But more than that, I felt an infinite sadness for Michael, my naive son, who had trusted the wrong person and paid for it with his entire life. I stood up and made them stand. "Come on," I said firmly, though I was still shaking inside. "Home with Mom. No more bridges, no more trash, no more hunger. I won't let you suffer for another day." Michael hesitated, his eyes full of shame. "Mom, I don't deserve it. I hurt you. I said horrible things. I can't." But I interrupted him, squeezing his hand. "You are my son. Nothing in this world can change that. Come on, Michael. Come with me." I took the 2 of them to the bus station in Santa Fe, holding Natalie's hand, while Michael walked behind, his head down, avoiding the eyes of others. The place was full of people. Loudspeakers announced departures, voices mixed together. But I didn't pay attention. I just wanted to take my son and granddaughter home, to the place they should never have left. I bought 3 bus tickets to Phoenix and chose the seats in the back so they could sit together, away from curious glances. When the bus started moving, Natalie rested her head on my legs, her tired eyes closed, and her small hand didn't let go of my fingers. Feeling those thin, cold fingers, but clinging so tightly, broke my heart. I stroked her messy hair, holding back tears. Michael sat next to me, silently looking out the window. The streetlights illuminated his emaciated face, highlighting the lines of suffering that hadn't existed 3 years ago. His eyes looked exhausted, but I knew he was trying to hide the inner storm. In the silence of the night journey, while the engine sounded like a distant song, Michael began to speak in a hoarse voice, as if every word cost him a huge effort. "The first few days were the worst, Mom," he began, without taking his eyes off the dark glass. "I had no documents. Adrian took them all, my ID, the family registration, even Natalie's birth certificate. I couldn't rent a room or get a decent job." I listened to him while stroking Natalie's hair, but inside I felt like I was suffocating. The image of my son, the same one who used to proudly drive the small delivery truck for the family factory, now wandering without a single paper, broke my heart. "What did you do to survive every day?" I asked him in a trembling voice, although part of me was afraid to hear the answer. Michael took a deep breath, as if he needed to gather courage. "I went to a construction site on the outskirts to ask for work as a helper. I thought at least I was healthy, I could do heavy labor, but the foreman just looked me up and down and waved his hand. 'If you don't have papers, go somewhere else. I don't want trouble.' I stood there, in the middle of the dust, feeling invisible. Nobody needed me. Nobody wanted to look at me." His voice broke, and I saw his shoulders tremble. "That first night, Natalie and I slept on a park bench. It was cold, and she was hugging her old doll, the one her mother left her, shaking nonstop. At midnight it started to rain. I had to carry her and run to take shelter under the roof of a closed store. She was crying, calling for her mother, and I could only hug her tighter, but inside, I felt helpless. I bit my lips, holding back tears. The image of Natalie, my small granddaughter, shaking in the rain and calling for her mother, tore me apart. "Why didn't you call me, Michael?" I whispered, my voice choked. "With just one call, I would have come immediately." Michael looked at me with red eyes. "I wanted to, Mom," he said with a tone full of remorse. "Once I found a coin in the trash. I stood in front of a public phone for a long time, the coin in my hand shaking. I knew if I called, you would come right away. But then, the words I said that day came back to my head. Even if I starve, I will never come back to you." Stupid pride and shame stopped me. I was afraid that you would look at me with disappointment, that you would see me as a failure, someone who doesn't deserve to be your son. I took his hand, rough and full of scars. That hand that was once soft, that used to hold the spoon with me while stirring the turkey and mashed potatoes in the kitchen, was now hard and marked. "I would never do that," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You are my son, Michael. No matter what happens, I will always love you." I squeezed his hand, wanting to transmit a little strength to him, a little faith that everything would be all right. Michael lowered his head, and tears rolled down his cheeks. "I don't deserve it, Mom. I made Natalie suffer. Once she had a very high fever. She was delirious, calling for her mother. I didn't have money to take her to the doctor. I could only wet a handkerchief in the river and put it on her forehead while I prayed. I thought I was going to lose her." His voice broke, and Natalie, though sleeping, moved a little, as if she felt her father's pain. I hugged Natalie tighter, and my tears fell onto her hair. "You did everything you could, Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. "You didn't abandon Natalie, even though everything was against you. I am proud of you for not giving up." I knew my words wouldn't erase his pain, but I wanted him to understand that I would never blame him. Michael continued speaking, in a tired voice, heavy with sorrow. "A homeless man took us under a bridge. He said at least we wouldn't get wet there. Every morning I left Natalie with an old woman who sold lottery tickets. She was kind, but also poor. She could only give her a little water and bread. Then I would go through the alleys looking for bottles and cans to sell. When I was lucky, I earned enough to buy a small carton of milk and some pastries, but sometimes I couldn't find anything, and we had to share a piece of hard bread from the day before. Natalie never complained, Mom. She just hugged her doll and said, 'Dad, tomorrow will be a better day, won't it?'" I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears began to fall silently. I imagined Natalie, only 6 years old, living through those days, learning to endure hunger and cold, when she should actually be playing, studying, and growing up in a warm home. I looked at her sleeping deeply in my arms, her small face still dirty, but peaceful. "She is strong, Michael," I said. "And so are you. You survived. Now that Mom is here, everything will be different." When the bus stopped at the station in Phoenix, the sun was already rising. The light of dawn spread softly over the familiar streets where I had lived all my life. I guided father and daughter back home, walking through the still empty streets, while the aroma of freshly baked bread began to float from the bakeries. Michael walked behind me, hesitant, as if he didn't dare to believe he could return. In front of the iron gate of the house, he stopped and looked at it with doubt in his eyes. "Mom, I don't know if I should go in," he murmured. "I hurt you. I don't deserve to be here." I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and then took his hand. "This is your home, Michael. It always will be." The familiar scent of flour and sugar from the small pastry shop behind the house mixed with the air, like a warm welcome. Natalie looked at the clean, cozy house in awe. Her eyes shone, although there was still shyness in them. She pointed to the old sofa in the living room and said in a small voice, "Dad, can we sleep here tonight?" I picked her up in my arms and hugged her tightly, feeling her small body tremble with excitement. I couldn't hold back the tears that rolled down my cheeks anymore. "Not just tonight, Natalie," I said in a trembling but firm voice. "From now on, this is your home. Nobody will ever kick you out again." I looked at Michael, who remained on the threshold, his eyes red. The first thing I did was prepare a bathtub with hot water in the small bathroom of the house. I carefully took Natalie inside, helping her take off her old, dirty clothes. Seeing her thin body, the slight purple marks on her arms and legs, made my heart shrink. I washed her gently, afraid of hurting her. Natalie stayed still, her big eyes watching me, and she smiled shyly when the foam settled in her hair. "Grandma, the warm water feels so good," she whispered in a clear but still fearful voice. I smiled, trying to hide the tears. "From now on, you can bathe with hot water every day, Natalie," I told her, stroking her wet hair. In the closet, I found a pink dress, small and delicate, that I had bought 2 years ago when I still had hope that Natalie would return someday. I thought I would never use it, but seeing the girl in the dress, radiant like a small flower, I felt my heart fill with warmth. Michael also bathed and shaved the thick beard that covered his face. When he came out of the bathroom, dressed in his father's old clothes, a bit big but clean, I almost didn't recognize him. Although he was still thin, his gaze no longer held so much darkness. I saw in him the son who used to laugh out loud in the kitchen when I taught him to wrap the coconut candies. "Mom, do I look okay?" he asked in an unsure voice, fearing my judgment. I approached, put a hand on his shoulder, and smiled. "You're still Mom's handsome son," I said, my voice choked. He lowered his head and smiled slightly, but I could see that the guilt still weighed heavily inside him. For the first meal in the house after 3 years of separation, I prepared a large pot of turkey and mashed potatoes, just like old times. The aroma of the turkey, the potatoes, and the spices filled the kitchen, like a reminder of the days when the family was still complete. Natalie sat at the table. Her eyes shone when she saw the bowl of turkey with gravy. She ate 2 plates in a row, exclaiming between bites, "Grandma, this is so good! I've never tasted anything so delicious." I smiled and stroked her hair, but my gaze went to Michael. He ate in silence, slowly, as if he was also trying to swallow the painful memories. I saw his shoulders tremble slightly, and I knew he wasn't just eating, but trying to regain the feeling of belonging to this home. My house, besides being a place to live, was also the traditional sweet shop, Grandma's Sweets, the family business that we had maintained for 3 generations. The aroma of caramel, lemon zest, and shredded coconut was always a part of my life. At first, Michael kept busy with small jobs in the shop. He swept the floor, carried sacks of sugar and flour. He worked nonstop, as if he wanted to redeem himself through physical effort. I let him do it without saying anything, but every time I saw him drenched in sweat, I felt a knot in my chest. "Rest a little, son," I told him one afternoon as I watched him wipe his forehead. But Michael just shook his head. "I have to, Mom. I owe you too much, Natalie." Meanwhile, Natalie adapted quickly. I enrolled her in an elementary school near home. She was smart, bright, and in a few weeks she had already caught up with her classmates. Every afternoon, when I went to pick her up, she would run to me, hug me tight, and excitedly start telling me her stories of the day. "Grandma, today the teacher complimented me for drawing the best in the class," she would say, showing me a clumsy but colorful drawing. Natalie's laughter seemed to bring light back to the house, dispelling the silence that had covered it for 3 years. One day, while struggling with my order book trying to calculate the amount of sweets for the next week, the numbers danced before my tired eyes. Michael came in, saw me struggling with the notebook and said, "Leave it to me, Mom. I have a faster way to do it." I was surprised, but I let him try. He sat down in front of my old computer and began to explore. In a few days, Michael had created a simple website for the shop. He took photos of the freshly made sweets and uploaded them to social media with small stories about our family recipes. "Mom, people buy a lot online now," he explained enthusiastically. "We have to keep up." I looked at my son and couldn't help but feel proud. My Michael, despite all the pain he had lived through, was still smart and creative. Orders began to arrive, at first only a few from the city. But little by little, the good reputation spread. People spoke of a family brand that not only offered delicious sweets, but also a heartwarming story of reunion. Michael designed new packaging, simple but professional, with the image of a grandmother making sweets next to a smiling girl. It was Natalie and me. He contacted delivery services, expanded the business to other states, and soon the phone didn't stop ringing with new orders. The shop was filled with life again, just like old times. Late one night, when I entered the shop, the lights were still on. Michael was focused on packing the last orders to deliver them the next morning. He looked up, sweat covering his forehead, but there was a little life shining in his eyes. I prepared him a cup of hot chocolate, as I used to do when he was a child, and put it on the table. "Rest a little, son," I said softly. Michael took the cup, inhaled deeply, and looked up at me. "Mom, I don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, Natalie and I—" His voice broke, and he didn't finish the sentence. I put my hand on his shoulder and smiled. "You don't need to say anything. As long as you and Natalie are here with me, that's enough." He smiled, a genuine smile, the first in 3 years. At that moment I knew that the wounds of the past were beginning to heal, but deep down I still felt regret. I wish I had put my pride aside and looked for Michael sooner. Maybe he and his father wouldn't have had to endure so many years of pain. I promised myself that, from now on, I would not allow anyone or anything to harm this family again. Our life slowly returned to normal. The bakery was prospering so much that a company in Canada contacted us to discuss importing our coconut and milk sweets. I watched Michael work, negotiate with partners, and manage orders, and I saw how he regained his confidence. Natalie also grew every day, becoming a cheerful girl who filled the house with light and laughter. But one sunny afternoon, when the shop was full of customers coming and going, a taxi stopped in front of the gate. The sound of the tires on the pavement made me look up with a feeling of unease. A woman got out of the car, wearing a fitted dress and sunglasses that covered almost her entire face. Michael, who was carrying a box toward the truck, stopped dead, his hands hanging at his sides. Natalie, who was sitting on the threshold reading a comic book, looked up with wide eyes. The woman slowly took off her glasses, revealing a face I could never forget. Adrian. The ghost of the past had returned, standing in front of my house, with that icy smile that I knew would bring a new storm. The bustle of the shop suddenly faded, as if the whole world was holding its breath. The laughter and voices of the customers choosing coconut and milk sweets stopped, replaced by curious looks toward the entrance. Adrienne was there, in front of the gate, in her fitted dress and dark sunglasses that almost covered her face. She was smiling, a perfect actress-on-stage smile, but I clearly saw the ice in her eyes. That smile didn't reach them. It had no warmth whatsoever. It was a mask, intended to hide intentions that I knew would not be good. My first reaction was to go out and stand in front of Natalie, guided by an instinct to protect. The girl, sitting on the threshold, dropped the comic book to the floor when she looked at the stranger. Michael, still holding the box, dropped it with a dull thud. He moved immediately, placing himself in front of Natalie, his body tense like a rope about to break. I could feel the mix of anger and fear in every one of his movements, as if Adrian was a dangerous beast capable of harming the girl at any moment. Natalie huddled behind her father, her small hand tightly gripping the hem of Michael's shirt. "Dad, who is she?" the girl whispered, innocent but full of confusion. That question was like a dagger in my heart. Natalie was still too young to understand what had happened, to remember that the woman standing in front of us had been her mother and had abandoned her and Michael at the airport 3 years ago. "Natalie, darling!" Adrienne's voice sounded falsely sweet, like a song out of tune. She knelt down, opened her arms, tears welling up on her carefully made-up face. "Come to Mommy. I've missed you so much." A perfect theatrical scene, but I saw the calculation in every one of her gestures. Natalie backed away, clinging even tighter to Michael, her eyes wide with fear. "Dad," the girl murmured, her voice trembling. I took a step forward, placing myself between Adrian and Natalie, my voice cold as ice. "This place doesn't welcome you, Adrian. Leave." I tried to remain calm, but the anger inside me burned like a fire. This woman had taken everything from Michael, his money, his honor, and even Natalie's future, and had abandoned them at the very bottom of society. And now she dared to come back, to pose as a loving mother? Michael spoke up. His voice no longer trembled with fear, but sounded firm and sharp. "What do you want, Adrienne? Haven't you caused us enough suffering already?" I felt the resentment in his voice, but also a hint of pain, as if the old wound had not yet healed. Adrienne stood up, brushed the dust off her expensive dress, and the smile on her lips faded. She glanced at the curious customers watching her, then looked at us, her voice soft but calculating. "I just want to redeem myself, Michael. I want to give Natalie a complete family. I made a mistake, but now I want to start over." I laughed scornfully, unable to hide my disdain. "A complete family? Do you even know how to spell that? You abandoned your daughter at the airport and left her to live under a bridge for 3 years. And now you dare to talk about family? Get out of here right now." My voice resonated, sharper than I expected, and some customers jumped. I didn't care. I just wanted Adrian to disappear, to protect Natalie and Michael from any harm. Seeing that we wouldn't yield, Adrienne changed her attitude. The false smile disappeared, giving way to a sharp look. Her voice turned cold. "Fine, Mrs. Elena. If you want to talk straight, I'll talk. I've come back to fight for custody of Natalie and—" She paused, pointing to the bakery full of customers, where trays of coconut and milk sweets still smelled on the shelves. "This place should be half mine. Michael, did you forget we were once husband and wife?" Michael almost lunged at her, his fists clenched, his face red with rage. "You have no right," he shouted, but I grabbed his hand and stopped him. I knew Adrienne was trying to provoke us, wanting us to lose our temper in front of everyone. I looked her in the eye, my voice calm but firm. "You won't get a single penny, and you won't get near my granddaughter. Now leave, Adrienne, before I call the police." Adrienne let out a jarring laugh, as if enjoying the moment. "Let's see what an old woman like you can do," she said sarcastically. "Wait for the court summons. Natalie is my daughter, and I'm going to take back what's mine." Having said that, she turned around, put on her sunglasses, got into a taxi, and left, leaving an oppressive silence in the bakery. The customers, uncomfortable, paid quickly and left, as if they didn't want to be involved in the drama that had just occurred. The sweet shop, once full of laughter and conversations, now felt strangely empty. Only the trays of motionless candies remained on the shelves, and the sweet aroma seemed out of place. Michael stood still, his hands so tightly clenched that his knuckles had turned white. I saw his shoulders tremble, not knowing if it was from rage or fear. Natalie, still hiding behind her father, looked up at me and asked in a low voice, "Grandma, is she my mom? Why did she say that, Mom?" I knelt down, hugged her, and tried to hide the fury boiling inside me. "Don't worry, Natalie," I whispered while stroking her hair. "Grandma and your dad won't let anyone take you. You'll stay here, with us, okay?" The girl nodded, although her eyes were still full of confusion. I looked up at the sky outside. Gray clouds were gathering, covering the bright morning sun. A storm was approaching, not only outside, but inside me as well. It all started one morning, a few days later, while I was reviewing the orders on the shop's website. A notification appeared from a food review group in the city of Phoenix. An account named First Time Mom had posted, "Warning to everyone. My son had a stomachache all night after eating the coconut candies from Grandma's sweets shop. I don't know what ingredients they use." The post was accompanied by a photo of a box of coconut candies with our logo, carelessly taken, as if to make it look cheap. I felt my blood boil. Grandma's sweets had been around for 3 generations, always with clean ingredients, a family recipe without a single complaint. That couldn't be true. Before I could respond, tons of comments began to appear from unknown accounts supporting the post. Yes, I also noticed a weird taste lately. They say they use chemical sugar to save costs. I bought once and never came back. Michael, who was sitting next to me, looked at the screen with a pale face. He immediately logged into the shop's account and wrote a comment explaining that all ingredients were carefully checked, that we could show quality certificates. But his comment was quickly buried by a wave of criticism. Those accounts, like a pack of wolves, continued attacking and spreading lies without any proof. The matter escalated faster than I imagined. Just 2 days later, a video appeared on social media. It showed a young woman, her face covered in tears, sitting next to an unconscious child in a bed with an IV connected to his arm. The woman sobbed, "Just because I trusted a family brand. Now my son is hospitalized with food poisoning. Please boycott that cruel shop." Next to the bed, very visibly placed, was a box of coconut candies with the Grandma's Sweets logo. Watching the video, I felt someone squeezing my neck. There was no proof, no hospital name, no medical documents, but the video spread at an alarming rate. A local sensationalist news outlet immediately published the headline, "The Truth Behind the Family Sweet Shop, Dirty Ingredients and Unconscionable Profits." The shop phone started ringing non-stop, but it wasn't for orders. They were calls to cancel, furious insults, and even threats. "Do you make sweets to poison people? Damn you!" an unknown voice shouted before hanging up. Partner stores, those that previously sold our sweets enthusiastically, called to ask to suspend the collaboration. The company in Canada, with whom we were negotiating the export, also sent an email announcing that they would temporarily suspend the deal to investigate the product quality. Every call, every email was like a stab in the heart. But what hurt me the most were the looks of others. Mrs. Peterson, my neighbor of a lifetime, who used to come every day to ask for lemon peels for her tea, now only lowered her head and turned away when she saw me. One night I heard a loud thump outside. When I went out, I saw several rotten eggs splattered against the door. The smell was unbearable. The shop, which once overflowed with laughter and conversations, became silent and cold. Trays of freshly made sweets, with that delicious coconut and milk aroma, rested intact on the shelves, with no one to buy them. Natalie, although still going to school, began to notice the change. One afternoon she came home with red eyes. She hugged me tightly and sobbed. "Grandma, my classmates say your sweets make people sick. Is it true?" I hugged her, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "No, Natalie. Your grandma's sweets are made with all my heart. They would never hurt anyone. Don't worry, I'll take care of everything." But as she nodded and snuggled into my arms, I knew I had just promised something I wasn't sure I could keep. One night, as I turned off the lights in the shop to close up, I saw Michael sitting alone in a corner, his head resting on the table, surrounded by boxes of unpacked sweets. The light from the street lamp entered faintly through the window, illuminating his haggard face. I approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Michael, go to sleep, son, it's late." He lifted his head, his eyes red from insomnia, and said in a hoarse voice, "Mom, maybe we should close the shop. I'll give her back the half she asked for. I don't want you or Natalie to keep suffering because of this. It's all my fault. If I hadn't let Adrian come back, none of this would have happened." Hearing him, all my tiredness vanished, and a flame of rage and determination ignited inside me. I sat down across from him, took his hands, and squeezed them hard. "Listen to me, Michael," I said firmly. "We didn't do anything wrong. This shop is the soul of our family, of your grandfather, your father, and now yours and mine. I won't let that demon destroy it, nor let her get near Natalie. I'd rather fight until the end than give up." Michael looked at me, still with doubt in his eyes, but I saw a glimmer of hope. "Mom, aren't you afraid?" he murmured like a small child. I smiled, though I was shattered inside. "Of course I'm afraid, son. But I'm more afraid of losing you and Natalie. I already lost you once, and I won't let it happen again." I got up, went to my room, and opened my husband's old wooden chest. Inside was a worn contact notebook where he kept the numbers of his closest friends. I flipped through the pages with a racing heart until I found a name, Mr. Robert. He was a retired lawyer who had helped our family years ago when we almost lost the shop over a land issue. I dialed the number with trembling hands. On the other end, a grave, familiar voice answered. "Hello? Who is calling?" "Robert, it's me, Ellen," I said, taking a deep breath to keep my voice steady. "I need your help. My family is in big trouble." I briefly told him about Adrienne, the rumors, the threat to take custody of Natalie and ruin the bakery. Mr. Robert listened without interrupting and then replied, "Ellen, calm down. I'll come tomorrow. We'll sort this out." I hung up the phone feeling a little relief, but I also knew that this battle was just beginning. Outside, the gray clouds were still suspended, but inside me, a new determination was ignited. I will protect my family, whatever the cost. The next morning, Mr. Robert appeared at my door, tall and in a worn suit, but still with the firm presence of a former investigator. His hair was almost completely gray, but his sharp gaze and calm voice conveyed confidence. He was not alone. He was accompanied by a young woman dressed in a smart office suit, her black hair tied back, and an intelligent, confident look. "Ellen, this is the attorney, Lucy Miller," Mr. Robert introduced her in a firm voice. "She is my most reliable collaborator, a specialist in complicated cases. She will help us." We sat in the living room, in the gloomy atmosphere of the Grandma's Sweets shop. The trays of candies were still intact on the shelves without the previous bustle. Natalie was at school, and I was relieved that she wasn't witnessing this tension. Michael and I recounted the entire story, from that fateful day 3 years ago when Adrienne abandoned father and daughter, to the malicious rumors now circulating on the internet. Michael, sitting next to me, clenched his hands on his knees, his voice full of remorse as he recalled his mistakes. I spoke about Adrienne, how she had appeared at the door demanding custody of Natalie and a share of the bakery. With every word I said, I felt a mix of rage and fear, but I forced myself to remain calm so as not to distress Michael further. Attorney Lucy listened attentively, taking notes in a small notebook. She didn't interrupt. She just nodded occasionally, as if fitting pieces together in her mind. When we finished, she didn't show pity, but instead asked a direct question. "When you divorced, Mr. Michael, did you sign any other agreement besides the asset transfer document? Any paper related to custody or joint assets?" Michael shook his head with a desperate look. "I don't remember well, Ms. Miller. I was in shock. Adrienne gave me the papers, and I just signed. I just wanted everything to end quickly so she would take Natalie to Australia as she promised." Lucy nodded without taking her eyes off Michael. "All right, the first thing is to retrieve that divorce file. It will be the key to defining your and Natalie's legal rights." Then she turned to me, her voice firm. "Mrs. Ellen, I need you to hand over any documents related to the bakery, the business license, the contracts with suppliers, and the quality certificates for the ingredients. We will prove that the rumors about the sweets are false." Mr. Robert spoke in a grave voice, but full of determination. "As for Adrienne, leave that to me. To create a smear campaign of that magnitude, she couldn't have done it alone. She surely left traces, and I'm going to find them." He said he had an acquaintance in the telecommunications sector who could track the social media accounts that spread the rumors. "Those accounts didn't appear out of nowhere," he said. "We're going to find their origin." He also proposed investigating the hospital in the viral video, where the child had supposedly been poisoned by our sweets. I don't think someone like Adrian could set up a perfect story without leaving loose ends, he added with a spark of confidence in his eyes. I felt a small ray of hope ignite within me, although I was still worried. I looked at Michael, who kept his head down, his hands tightly clasped. "Mom, I'm sorry," he murmured. "If I hadn't let myself be tricked by Adrian the first time, maybe she wouldn't be bothering us again now." I took his hand and squeezed it hard. "Don't blame yourself anymore, son. We're going to get through this together. I promise you." I knew it wouldn't be easy to keep that promise, but I couldn't allow Michael to collapse again. Mr. Robert got to work immediately. Only 2 days later, he called on the phone with an excited voice. "Ellen, we found it. All the social media accounts that spread the rumors are fake accounts, created less than a month ago. They operate from the same IP addresses, and one of them is registered at an internet cafe in Santa Fe. I asked them to check the security cameras in the place, and just as I imagined, Adrian appears in the recordings using a computer right when the messages were published." I gripped the phone. My heart was pounding. So she was behind everything, just as I suspected. Mr. Robert continued, "I also went to the hospital where the child in the video was treated. The child was hospitalized, but not for food poisoning. He has asthma and suffered an acute crisis. The child's mother, an old friend of Adrian's, admitted that she was offered money to participate in the hoax. They set up the crying scene and placed the box of your brand's sweets to record the video." I felt a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at Adrian's cruelty, but relief because the truth was starting to come out. Meanwhile, Lucy, the attorney, and I went to the courthouse in Santa Fe, where Michael and Adrian's divorce had taken place 3 years ago. Getting a copy of an old file was not an easy task, especially because Adrian had done everything possible to hide it. But thanks to Lucy's contacts and her patience, we managed to get the file in our hands after a long morning. We sat in a small cafe near the courthouse, looking through every yellowed page of the document. The aroma of coffee couldn't alleviate my tension. Every page was like a fragment of the past, recalling the painful days Michael had suffered. Then Lucy stopped at the last page, a typewritten sheet with letters so small we had to squint to read it. She brought it closer to me with a bright look. "Mrs. Ellen, read this." I took it with trembling hands, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a voluntary declaration signed by Adrian Smith. The text read, "I, Adrian Smith, upon receiving the entirety of Mr. Michael Miller's assets, commit to not requesting alimony or claiming any rights over Mr. Miller's assets in the future." I read that line over and over, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Adrian, in her own caution, had shot herself in the foot. She signed that document to ensure that Michael would not interfere with her new life, but now it had become the evidence that condemned her. I handed the paper to Michael, who had been sitting next to me in silence for a while. He read it, his eyes wide, and then he looked at me. "Mom, what does this mean?" he asked with a trembling voice. Lucy smiled with a firm tone. "It means Adrian has no legal right to claim any assets of yours or the bakery. And with everything she did, false accusations, defamation, we can sue her for slander and intentional infliction of emotional distress." At that moment, Lucy's phone rang. It was Mr. Robert. "Ellen, I have more news," he said excitedly. "Adrian is not living as well as she pretends. She invested all the money she took from Michael in overseas cryptocurrencies and lost everything. Now she owes a large amount of money." He read an article on a gourmet blog that praised the success of the Grandma's Sweets bakery. "That's why she came back, not just to get Natalie, but to get money from you and Michael." All the pieces clicked into place. I held the copy of the commitment, my heart aching for Michael's naivety, but also full of renewed hope. "God is fair," I murmured with misty eyes. Lucy put her hand on my shoulder and smiled confidently. "Now we won't just defend ourselves, Mrs. Ellen. We're going to counterattack. I'll prepare the lawsuit against Adrian for defamation and damages. With this document and Mr. Roberts' evidence, she won't have a chance to win." On the day of the trial, I got up at dawn. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusted my simple but neat dress, and tried to take a deep breath to stay calm. Today was not just a hearing. It was a battle to protect my family, to defend what we had rebuilt from the ashes. I looked at Natalie, asleep on the sofa with her old doll in her hands. I decided to leave her at home with 2 trusted employees from the bakery, Rose and John. I didn't want her to witness her biological mother facing us in court. She was too young to endure another wound. The courtroom in Santa Fe was packed. When we entered, I felt the curious looks and the murmurs of the audience. On the other side, Adrienne was sitting next to her lawyer, a middle-aged man in a flashy suit. She wore a dark blue dress, her hair up, and smiled confidently at the journalists she had clearly invited. I saw her look at us with a sideways smile, as if she was already savoring the victory. Next to her was the woman from the video, the mother of the poisoned child, her face tense but feigning sadness. I took Michael's hand and felt its coldness. "Relax, son," I whispered. "The truth is on our side." On our side, there were only 4 people: me, Michael, Attorney Lucy, and Mr. Robert. There were no flashes pointed at us, no applause. We remained silent, but I felt the determination in Lucy's and Robert's eyes. They were our support, my family's, in that decisive moment. The trial began. Adrienne's lawyer stood up, his voice so theatrical he sounded like a stage actor. He told a story that I knew was false, that Adrienne was an abused wife and mother, expelled from her home by her husband, and forced to make a living alone abroad. He said she had only returned to claim justice, to reunite with her daughter, and to recover the share of the assets she deserved. He called that woman as a witness, and she, through sobs, recounted how her son almost died from our sweets. The journalists took notes nonstop. The flashes kept shining. I looked at Michael, saw him with his head down, his hands so tightly clasped that his knuckles turned white. I put my hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Don't be afraid, son. She cannot win." When it was our turn, Attorney Lucy stood up. Her demeanor was serene but full of authority. She didn't argue against the slanders or fall into the emotional trap Adrienne had prepared. Instead, she began with the first piece of evidence, the health and food safety certificate for the sweet shop, issued just 1 month ago. The Grandma's Sweets Bakery has been operating for over 60 years without a single case of food poisoning, she said in a clear, firm voice. All ingredients are carefully checked, and we have all the documentation to prove it. Then she presented the hospital evidence, along with the statement from the doctor who treated the child in the video. This child was admitted for an acute asthma attack, not for food poisoning, Lucy explained, showing the medical report. The woman serving as a witness turned pale, lowered her head, and avoided looking at the judge. Lucy continued, "This woman received money to invent a false story, and we have evidence of the financial transaction between her and the defendant, Ms. Adrienne Smith." The room fell silent. I heard murmurs among the journalists, but this time the cameras were pointing at Adrienne. She remained seated upright, although I noticed how she gripped the edge of the table. The confident smile had disappeared. And then came the final blow. Lucy held up a copy of the voluntary agreement. Her voice resonated like a hammer blow. "Your Honor, this is the document signed by Adrienne Smith herself 3 years ago. In it, she declares to completely waive any right to assets or alimony from Mr. Michael Miller after having received the entirety of the joint assets. Her return today, claiming custody of her daughter and a share of the sweet shop, not only violates this agreement, but constitutes a deliberate act of fraud and defamation against the Miller family." She also presented evidence of Adrienne's financial situation, large debts in Australia, a failed cryptocurrency investment, and an article on a gourmet blog that revealed her intention to return to get money. Lucy concluded, "Ms. Smith did not return for love of her daughter, but for greed. She mounted a defamation campaign to destroy the reputation of the Grandma's Sweets Bakery, causing severe financial and emotional damage to the plaintiff family." Adrienne stood motionless, her face completely pale. "No, that's false," she stammered, standing up, her voice trembling. But the signature on the document was authentic, notarized. Her lawyer tried to refute, but his arguments were weak, unable to tear down the evidence. The judge struck the gavel, and the room fell into absolute silence. After deliberating, he delivered the verdict. The demands of the defendant, Ms. Adrienne Smith, regarding custody and assets are hereby rejected. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented, this court finds that there are indications of defamation and intentional damages. The plaintiff has the right to file a counterclaim against Ms. Smith for these actions. The reporters who had come looking for scandalous headlines about the evil pastry shop now pointed their cameras at Adrienne. She, panicking, tried to cover her face with her hands and quickly scurried out of the courtroom, getting lost in the crowd. I watched her leave without feeling satisfaction, only a deep sadness. When we left the courthouse, the sun was shining brightly, as if the sky was also celebrating our victory. Some neighbors were waiting at the entrance, including Mrs. Peterson. She ran toward me, took my hands, and said with a voice full of regret, "Ellen, forgive me. We were so foolish to believe those rumors. You and Michael didn't deserve to go through all this." I smiled and shook my head. "Don't worry, Mary. It's all over now. Thank you for coming." When the crowd dispersed, only Michael, Lucy, Mr. Robert, and I remained. I took Lucy's hand, my eyes misty. "Miss Miller, thank you. If it weren't for you and Mr. Robert, I don't know what would have become of my family." Lucy smiled with a warm look. "Mrs. Ellen, I only did my job, but I must tell you, you are the strongest mother I have ever met." Mr. Robert nodded and patted Michael on the shoulder. "You are a good man, Michael. Don't let the past define you." When we arrived home, Natalie was playing in the yard with Rose. Seeing us, she ran toward us, hugging my legs and Michael's, laughing with joy. "Grandma, Dad, today the teacher complimented me on my essay about our family." I lifted her into my arms, feeling her small heart beating strongly. Michael hugged me and said with a choked voice, "Mom, thank you. If it weren't for you, Natalie and I—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. I patted his back and smiled. "We are family, Michael. I will always be here for you." The sunlight illuminated the patio, making the trays of freshly baked sweets from the shop shine. I looked at the blue sky without a single cloud. We don't need to go all the way to distant Australia to find happiness, I thought. As long as we are together, that's enough. After everything we had been through, I understood that forgiving does not mean forgetting, but freeing the heart from hatred and pain. Life can take everything from us, money, prestige, even faith. But if we keep love and kindness, we can always start over. I understood that sometimes pain is life's way of teaching us to distinguish between the false and the true, between those who come to hurt us and those who stay to heal us. I no longer blame Adrienne, nor do I hold a grudge against the past, because it was precisely those wounds that made me stronger, capable of protecting my son and my granddaughter. And if there is something I want to say to those who feel lost between suffering and loss, it is this: never believe that everything is over. Sometimes, among the ruins, is where we find the way back home. The story you have just heard has changed names and places to protect the identity of those involved. We are not telling this to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and stops to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own home? I sincerely wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you remain silent to keep the peace, or would you have the courage to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can be a candle that lights someone else's path. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage will guide us toward better days. For now, at the end of the screen, I will leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.